I stood in the middle of my own living room, the place I built with my own hands more than 3 decades ago. Across from me, my son-in-law, Mark, froze as 3 officers stepped inside. One of them looked at him and said slowly, "Sir, this property hasn't legally belonged to you for the past 72 hours." His face turned pale. My wife, Sarah, held my arm. I looked at him and whispered, "You wanted me out? Now you're getting exactly what you tried to do to me." Before I continue, thank you for being here. Please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to how all of this began. When I look back at that moment in my living room, the officers, the cold silence, Mark shaking hands, it still feels unreal. But the truth is, everything that happened that day began long before anyone stepped through my front door. And to understand why things reached that point, I need to take you back to the quiet life I lived before the storm. My name is David Carter. I'm 62 years old, born and raised in Oregon. For most of my life, I worked as a contractor. I built homes, barns, fences, porches, anything made of wood or stone. I liked the work. It was steady, honest, simple. By the time I retired, my hands were worn, but my heart was full. I had built a 6-bedroom house on a piece of land I loved. I paid for it little by little. No loans, no debts. Just years of sweat and early mornings and quiet pride. I lived there with my wife, Sarah. She has always been the calm voice in my life, the person who sees the good in people, even when I can't. Our days were slow, peaceful. I spent mornings in the garden trimming the roses or checking the soil. Afternoons in my workshop sanding down pieces of cedar or carving small gifts for neighbors. We cooked simple meals. We sat on the porch at sunset. Life felt steady, like a warm breath after a long winter. Our daughter Emily visited when she could. She's 34 now. Smart, kind, a heart too gentle for the world sometimes. And she married a man named Mark. Mark was 38 when everything happened. A smooth talker, confident, always presenting himself like someone who had life figured out. He shook hands too tightly, smiled too widely. Every time he walked into a room, he acted like he owned the air in it. He was always pitching something. A business idea here, a new opportunity there. He spoke fast with big dreams, but none of them ever felt solid. Still, for Emily's sake, I tried to be polite, civil, careful. I kept my doubts quiet, because I wanted her to be happy, even if I didn't fully trust the man she married. For a while, things were calm. Emily and Mark visited on weekends. We had coffee on the porch. We shared meals. There were moments when I thought maybe, just maybe, everything was stable. But life has a way of shifting. When you least expect it, peace can disappear in a single breath. And the first sign of the storm arrived on a warm afternoon. I remember hearing Mark's car outside. He walked into my house with a smile that was just a little too wide, a little too forced. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't know why yet, but I knew something was coming. What I didn't realize was that this visit was the start of everything that followed. The pressure, the betrayal, the quiet war inside my own home. And it all began the day Mark asked to meet me alone, away from everyone else. A meeting that would tear open the truth behind his smile. That moment leads us into what happened next. That uneasy smile Mark wore the day he walked into my house. I didn't forget it, but I didn't ask about it either. Sometimes when something feels wrong, you tell yourself it's nothing. You breathe through it. You wait. You hope it passes. It didn't. 2 days later, Mark called me. His voice was smoother than usual, almost rehearsed. "David," he said, "can we meet just the 2 of us? There's something important I want to share." I asked him what it was about. He laughed softly, like we were old business partners instead of a father and son-in-law. "Better if we talk in person," he said. "Big opportunity. Life-changing." Something inside me hesitated, but I agreed. For Emily. Always for Emily. We met at a small cafe not far from my home. The kind of place where the air smells like roasted beans and old wood, and conversations stay low private. I got there early and sat by the window. Mark arrived a few minutes later wearing a sharp suit he didn't usually wear. He looked excited, restless. His eyes kept darting around as if he was making sure no one else was listening. When he sat down, he didn't waste time. He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and said, "David, I found something big. I stayed quiet, just listening. He pulled out a folder, thin, too thin for anything real, and slid it across the table. Inside were printed pages with glossy pictures of tall buildings, foreign investors, smiling executives. It looked polished, too polished, like something taken from a brochure rather than a real plan. He began talking fast. A global real estate network, a rare entry point, a once-in-a-lifetime investment. Words that didn't feel grounded. Words that floated in the air without touching anything real. Then he lowered his tone, almost whispering. "All it needs," he said, "is capital. $30 million. And with your help, we could secure a position at the top." I stared at him, unsure if I heard him right. "Mark," I said slowly, "I don't have $30 million. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "You have something better," he said. "Your name, your credit, your house." He paused. "As collateral." The words hit me like a quiet blow. He said them so casually, as if my home, my life's work, was just another piece on his game board. I shook my head. No, absolutely not. His expression changed instantly. The excitement drained away, replaced by something colder, sharper. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me, like he was studying a problem, not talking to a person. "David," he said slowly, "you're retired. You don't need that much space anymore. Think about your daughter's future." I felt my jaw tighten. "This isn't about my daughter," I said. "This is about you." For the first time, his mask slipped. His smile tightened. His eyes hardened. He leaned forward again, this time with no warmth at all. "Don't be selfish," he whispered. "You live in a house worth more than that. Are you really going to let it sit there while your family struggles, family?" He used that word like a tool, like something he could twist to fit whatever he wanted. I stood up, keeping my voice calm. "I won't risk my home, and I won't be part of this." He didn't stand. He just looked up at me with a thin smile, the kind that hides a warning. "You'll regret this," he said softly. "You're making things harder than they need to be." I walked out without answering. But even as I stepped into the fresh air, my chest felt heavy. Something had shifted, something quiet but dangerous. I didn't know it then. But saying no to Mark that day didn't just end a conversation. It created a fracture. A small one at first, barely visible. But fractures grow. They spread. They divide. And soon, Mark stopped pretending altogether. That cafe meeting was the beginning of the war he would bring into my home. The pressure that came next was only the first step. When I walked out of that cafe, I told myself the tension would fade. I told myself Mark would calm down, think things through, and realize what he asked of me was unreasonable. I wanted to believe he would apologize, or at least let the matter rest. But people reveal who they are when they don't get what they want. And Mark, he wasn't interested in peace. He was interested in control. And he had decided that I was standing between him and whatever future he imagined for himself. The shift began slowly at first. Quiet moments, small changes, but each one chipped away at the life I thought was stable. The next time Emily and Mark came to the house, he acted as if nothing had happened. He walked in with a cheerful tone. He complimented the garden. He greeted my wife with a warm hug, but when it was just the three of us in the kitchen, his mask slipped. He looked at me with a calm, steady smile and said, "David, I told Emily about the meeting. I said you were scared. You just need time to understand the opportunity." Emily frowned. "Dad, is everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. I was still caught off guard by how casually he twisted the truth. Scared? No, I wasn't scared. I was cautious, protective. But Mark didn't want Emily to see it that way. He placed a hand on her shoulder and let out a small laugh. "It's normal. His generation doesn't understand these things. They don't see how fast the world is changing. The way he said his generation, as if I were some fragile relic from another era. I kept my voice calm. "Emily, your husband asked me to risk our home. I said no. That's all." Mark smirked like I'd proven his point. "See, Fear, you hold on to everything like the world hasn't moved forward." The words weren't loud. They weren't even openly hostile, but they were sharp enough to cut. Emily looked torn, and I could see her trying to understand both sides. I didn't want to argue in front of her, so I changed the subject. But from that moment on, Mark used every visit as a stage to make me look weak, old, stubborn, outdated. He joked about my old-fashioned thinking. He teased me about not understanding business. He made passive comments about how some people don't know how money works. For Emily's sake, I stayed silent, but the silence only encouraged him. About a week later, I heard voices outside my window. I walked to the living room and saw two strangers standing in the yard. Both were wearing business suits, holding clipboards. Mark was with them. They were walking around my property as if they owned the place, pointing at things, measuring with their eyes, writing down notes. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" One of the men smiled politely. "We're real estate agents." Mark invited us to take a look. I didn't let him finish. "This is my property. No one looks at anything without my permission. Please leave." They nodded and walked back to their car. But Mark stayed where he was. Arms crossed, that same smug smile stretched across his face. "Dad," he said softly, "you just scared off a very good opportunity." I stared at him in disbelief. "Mark, what are you doing? You cannot bring people onto my land without asking." He shrugged. "Just planning ahead." He tapped my shoulder like we were old friends sharing a secret. "You'll thank me later." He walked away before I could answer. But inside something broke. A boundary had been crossed. Not the kind you see, but the kind you feel. My home no longer felt entirely safe. And he knew it. Soon after that incident, the emotional pressure began. Not from Mark directly, but through Emily. She showed up one afternoon looking distressed. She sat at my kitchen table and stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "Dad," she whispered, "why won't you help us?" My chest tightened. "Emily, what did he tell you?" She lifted her eyes, and I saw pain in them. "Mark said you refuse to support us. He said you think we're irresponsible. He said you don't trust us." I took a slow breath. "Emily, that's not true. I love you. I want you to be safe. But what he's asking me to do is dangerous." Tears filled her eyes. "He said you're keeping money locked away while we're trying to start a future. He said you think your house is more important than us." Each word felt like a quiet wound. I wanted to take her hands, tell her the whole truth, but I also didn't want to hurt her by exposing the man she loved. So I kept my voice gentle. "Sweetheart, you don't need $30 million for a future, and no one should risk their home for a stranger's plan." She shook her head. "It's not a stranger's plan, Dad. It's Mark, my husband." She left soon after her eyes red, and I knew exactly who put those tears there. Mark wasn't just pushing me. He was turning my own daughter against me, and that was the moment I realized it wasn't just about the money. It was about control, and he was tightening his grip. A few nights later, Sarah woke me with a soft touch. "David," she whispered, "I heard something downstairs." I grabbed a robe and walked down the staircase, quietly listening for any sound. When I reached the hallway, I saw a faint light coming from my office. I moved closer, slow, careful, and there he was. Mark, standing in my office, digging through drawers, holding folders filled with property documents. He didn't even look startled when I turned on the light. He just closed the drawer slowly and faced me. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice firm but calm. He slipped his hands into his pockets. "Just getting familiar with things," he said. "You're not getting any younger, David. Someone has to take over eventually." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "This is my home, my office, my documents. You have no right to be here." He smirked, tilting his head. "You have more than you need. We're the future. You should be preparing to hand things down." I stepped toward him, keeping my tone even. "This conversation is over. Leave." For the first time, he didn't pretend to be friendly. He didn't soften his voice. He didn't hide the disdain in his eyes. "So this is how it's going to be," he murmured. "You holding on, while everyone else moves ahead." He brushed past me and walked out of the house without another word. But the damage was done. It wasn't just disrespect. It wasn't just entitlement. It was betrayal. And he didn't even try to hide it. About 10 days later, a formal envelope arrived in the mail. Thick paper, a legal seal, my name printed neatly on the front. Inside was a document titled Request for Transfer of Ownership. Mark had filed a claim stating that I had verbally agreed to sign over part of my property to him, a shared ownership arrangement, as he called it. I felt the room tilt slightly as I read the details. He had not only lied, he had taken a legal step to make that lie look real. I showed the letter to Emily. She looked shaken. But then she whispered something I never expected to hear. "Dad, maybe you did mention something, maybe you just forgot." I stared at her. Hearing those words from my own daughter, it felt like the ground under me had cracked. She continued quietly, "Mark says, you agreed during the cafe meeting. Maybe you didn't realize what you said, I took a slow breath. I never agreed to anything. Not then, not ever. Emily didn't look convinced. Not fully. Mark had gotten to her, twisted her mind, pulled her into his story. That letter, that false claim. It was the moment everything clicked into place. Mark didn't want a loan. He didn't want support. He wanted my house. All of it. The land, the value, the security, the foundation of everything I'd built in my life. He wanted it all. And he was willing to use my daughter, the law, and manipulation to get it. Standing in my office, holding that document, I realized something important, something painful, something necessary. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This wasn't a family dispute. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a takeover, a quiet invasion, one that had worked its way into my home without me noticing the full danger of it. And that was when something inside me changed. A calm, steady resolve, the kind that doesn't shake, the kind that doesn't speak loudly but speaks clearly, the kind that says enough. I understood finally that Mark had crossed a line he could never step back from. He had pushed too far. And he had exposed exactly who he was. What I didn't know yet was just how deep his lies went, and how much worse things were about to become, because the truth, the full truth, was waiting just around the corner. And once I learned it, everything shifted. Every doubt, every fear, every hesitation I had ever felt disappeared. And what replaced it was clarity, a clarity that would lead me to the moment I finally took control, the moment I began my quiet revenge. But first, I had to learn the truth about the man my daughter married, the truth that would change everything. I continued down the hallway without looking back, but the echo of that slammed drawer kept following me. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something I didn't want to name. And as I stepped into the living room, the soft creak of the floorboards reminded me that nothing here was as steady as it used to be. I sank onto the edge of the couch, still hearing my son's voice in my head, calm, too calm, asking me to reconsider things. That phrase alone felt like a quiet blade, a polite warning, a reshaping of boundaries I hadn't agreed to. And while I was trying to steady myself to understand how all of this had turned into a negotiation, I never wanted the front door opened. My daughter-in-law stepped inside. She moved with a softness that used to make me feel at ease. Today it only made me tense. Her smile was gentle, sympathetic, almost rehearsed. She greeted me the way someone greets a man standing on the edge of something fragile. "I heard you were talking with him," she said, setting her bag down as if she didn't want the sound to startle me. "He said you seemed unsettled." There was a careful pause in her voice, too careful, as if she already knew why. I nodded, choosing my words with the same caution she used. "We just needed to clear the air." She sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes steady and bright, but unreadable. "I know things feel different lately," she said, "but we're trying our best to keep everything stable. For everyone, for everyone." That phrase hit harder than she realized. Because I wasn't everyone. I was the one who built the foundation they were standing on. And yet I was the one being asked to move, gently, speak softly, accept limits I never imagined my own children would draw. She spoke again. "He didn't mean to upset you. He's just under a lot of pressure. The company, the transition, the numbers. It's a lot." I watched her carefully. Her tone was smooth, even warm, but there was something underneath it, something I recognized too easily. A subtle steering, a quiet reinforcement of a decision already made. She wasn't here to comfort me. She was here to make sure I understood. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch just a little too long. "Pressure is part of life," I said, "but pressure doesn't change the truth." A flicker crossed her face, small, fast, but real. She hadn't expected that. She adjusted her posture, drawing a slow breath. "We're not trying to take anything away from you." "You know that, right?" I smiled, but the expression felt thin. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." For a moment she didn't respond. She simply watched me, her eyes narrowing just enough to betray the thought running through her mind. A calculation, a shift, a decision to adjust the strategy. She stood smoothing the wrinkles in her sweater. "Maybe tonight we can sit down together. The three of us. Go over everything clearly. It'll make you feel better." There it was, wrapped in kindness. Close enough to comfort, just far enough from honesty to sting. I nodded again, but this time it wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement, understanding, a quiet acceptance that the ground beneath me had already been rearranged. She walked toward the kitchen, and as she disappeared around the corner, I finally let the realization settle. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't miscommunication. This was coordination, and for the first time I saw the outline of something I hadn't wanted to see, something that had been unfolding quietly, gently, politely, something that began long before today, the kind of thing that didn't break a family in one moment, but shifted it inch by inch until the truth was almost unrecognizable. And I felt it then, a steady, low tension rising in my chest, not anger, not fear, but the awareness that I was walking into a conversation tonight that would change everything. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go. Not yet. I didn't move from the couch after she walked into the kitchen. I just sat there listening to the soft clatter of dishes, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the clock mounted above the hallway. Sounds that used to feel familiar, comforting part of a home. I thought I understood. But now each sound felt like a reminder that something was shifting beneath me. As the minutes passed, I felt the weight of what she had implied, not through her words, but through the precision of her tone. She wasn't asking, she wasn't suggesting. She was guiding me somewhere, preparing me for something, and the way she said the three of us replayed in my mind like a thin thread pulling me toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. I leaned forward, rubbing my hands together slowly. The conversation with my son, the gentle caution in his voice, the careful phrasing, then her stepping in right after all of it fit too cleanly together. There was coordination, and that meant intention. I stood up, trying to clear my head, and walked toward the window. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the yard in long, pale lines, touching the edges of the fence I built so many years ago. I remembered the day I put it in, hammering each board with the confidence of a man who believed his family would always move with him, never against him. I didn't know then how subtle distance could be. How it didn't arrive in storms or shouting matches, but in quiet exchanges and polite suggestions. How a transition of roles, a father stepping back, a son stepping forward, could twist into something far more complicated. As I watched the sunlight fade, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. My son appeared in the doorway, his expression calm but heavier than before. He pushed his hands into his pockets, a gesture he used to make when he was nervous as a boy. Now it looked like he was bracing himself. "Dad," he said softly. "Can we talk before dinner?" I turned toward him, giving him space to speak. He stepped farther into the room, stopping a few feet away. "I know today has been a lot, and I don't want you to feel blindsided. But we need to address some things openly. No tension, no assumptions." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that made me uneasy. Not hostility, not impatience, but a quiet certainty. The kind that comes after a decision has already been made. I nodded. "All right, tell me." He exhaled slowly, glancing briefly toward the kitchen before focusing on me again. "It's about the company, the accounts, the long-term structure." That word, structure, landed like a stone. It wasn't the word a son used with his father. It was the word an executive used with a man being eased out. I didn't speak yet. I let him continue. "I've been handling most of the operations for a while now," he said. "And investors want clarity about leadership. Consistency. They're asking about future control and safeguards." Safeguards. Another quiet blade. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "We're not trying to push you aside, but we need to formalize things, put boundaries on decisions, make sure everything is protected. Protected from what I asked." He hesitated only for a second, but it was enough to expose the truth he didn't want to say out loud. "Protected from uncertainty," he finally answered. "Uncertainty. Age, change, dependence. All the things people dance around when they don't want to sound ungrateful." I felt a slow warmth building in my chest, not anger, just something heavy. "You think I'm a risk?" I said quietly. He shook his head quickly. "No, it's not like that. You've carried everything for decades. But now, we need to prepare for the next phase. The future isn't just yours anymore." That was the moment the air shifted. Not because of what he said, but because I finally understood the shape of everything happening around me. The softened tones, the gentle pauses, the careful words. They weren't trying to help me understand. They were trying to help me accept. He waited for me to respond, his expression hopeful in a way that felt almost rehearsed, as if he needed me to agree to something he didn't want to force. I swallowed, letting the silence settle between us. "So tonight," I said, "you want me to sign something. Don't you?" He didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked again toward the kitchen. And that was all the confirmation I needed. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to prepare me. He stepped back, drawing in a breath that sounded heavier than before. "We just want what's best for everyone," he murmured. There it was again, that phrase. For everyone. He turned toward the hallway, leaving me alone with the fading light and the quiet hum of the house. And as I stood there letting his words settle, I realized something important. This wasn't a moment I could walk into blindly. Tonight wasn't just a conversation. It was a line, a shift in power, a silent crossing, a decision that would define what came next for all of us. And as the sky outside darkened, I felt something inside me sharpen, not anger, not fear, just clarity. Whatever they were planning, whatever they expected me to agree to, they were about to learn something they had forgotten. I wasn't built to surrender quietly. I stayed in the living room, long after he walked down the hallway. The house felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, not comforting, just quiet in a way that made every breath feel heavier. I could still hear faint sounds from the kitchen, soft clinks, muted movements, as if they were preparing not a meal, but a moment. And the truth was, they were. I knew it now. I felt it in the way my son stood, the tone he used, the pauses he took before choosing each word with care. It was the kind of tone people used when they were trying to guide someone toward a decision without saying it directly. I sat down again, letting my hands rest on my knees. I hadn't felt this strange mix of calm and tension in years. It was the calm that comes before something you didn't ask for, but saw coming anyway. For a while, I just listened. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the faint tap of a faucet drip, a cupboard closing somewhere near the pantry. All of it blending into an atmosphere that felt rehearsed, planned, coordinated. Then I heard the footsteps, not rushed, not hesitant, just slow, careful, almost rhythmic. My wife appeared first. She stood by the doorway, her hands folded together in front of her. She gave me a warm smile, but there was something behind it, a softness that felt too practiced. Behind her, my son-in-law stepped into view, carrying a few documents tucked under his arm. My son followed last. He wasn't carrying anything, but he didn't need to. The weight he carried was in his expression, an expression that told me he had been preparing himself for this moment. "We're almost ready for dinner," my wife said gently. "But we thought, before we sit down, maybe we should talk as a family." There it was, the phrase people use when they want to sound gentle while placing something heavy on the table. I nodded once, slowly. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." They exchanged glances, quick, subtle, but meaningful. It reminded me of how people coordinate during a presentation, each one waiting for their turn to speak. My wife moved to sit beside me, placing her hand lightly over mine. My son sat across from me, and my son-in-law stayed standing, arranging the papers neatly on the coffee table. No one spoke at first, and in that silence I could feel the moment tightening around us like a quiet thread pulling everything closer. My son finally cleared his throat. "Dad," he began, "we know how much you've carried. All these years. The company, the house, the responsibilities, everything. And we're grateful for that. Truly. It was a respectful start, a familiar pattern. Praise before the shift." He leaned forward slightly. "But things are changing now. Investors want clarity. They want stability. And with everything moving so fast, they're asking for adjustments to leadership. Not to remove you, but to protect what you've built." I watched him carefully. His words were well chosen, steady, and calm. Too calm. My son-in-law added, "There are some documents we drafted. Just preliminary. They outline a transition plan. Your role would still be important. You'd still be honored as founder. But some decisions, major ones, would shift to me and your son. To keep everything aligned, I looked at the papers without touching them. I didn't need to read them to understand what they meant. They weren't offering me a choice. They were offering me an outcome. My wife squeezed my hand gently, her voice soft. "It's just the next chapter, love. We all move forward at some point. And this way, nothing gets complicated." Complicated, a word that can mean many things. But in moments like this, it means only one thing. They no longer trust you to decide. I let out a slow breath. "And what if I don't sign?" I asked quietly. My son didn't flinch. He had prepared for that question. "Then we'll keep talking," he said. "But it will be harder. Much harder. And the board will eventually act on their own. We're trying to make this easier for you. For all of us." My son-in-law added quickly, "This way, you'll still have influence. You'll still be respected. We're not taking anything from you. We're protecting you. Protecting me." That was the second time the word appeared. I leaned back, letting the room settle. I could feel 3 different energies surrounding me, my wife's gentle insistence, my son's calm determination, my son-in-law's structured confidence, and somewhere beneath all that softness was a single unspoken message. Sign now, or things will move without you. I reached for the papers, not to sign them, not to read them, just to hold them. They were warm from being tucked under an arm, a few pages neatly typed with printed signatures already prepared at the bottom. They had planned this well. I set the pages back down slowly. You've all been thinking about this for a while, I said softly. Haven't you? Another shared glance. Another silent confirmation. It's not meant to hurt you, my son said. We just want what's best. That phrase again. What's best? I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I finally understood the complete picture. The small conversations, the gentle reminders, the coordinated tone, the timing of the meeting. Everything fit together now, clear and smooth, like pieces of a puzzle finally settling into place. I stood up slowly. No sudden movements, no raised voice, just a quiet rise from the couch. Let's eat first, I said calmly. We can talk after dinner. I want a clear mind for this. My wife smiled with relief. My son exhaled softly. My son-in-law quickly gathered the papers and placed them neatly aside. As they walked toward the dining room, I stayed behind for just a moment longer. And in that small, private pause, I felt something settle inside me, something steady and sharp. They thought they were guiding me toward a conclusion, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that they had just given me the clarity I needed. Not to surrender, not to step aside, but to prepare. Because this transition they wanted, this shift in control they had already written out, was about to take a very different turn. Dinner felt strangely quiet, even though everyone was trying to act normal. Plates moved, glasses shifted, soft conversation floated around the table, but none of it reached me. I nodded when someone spoke, offered a small smile when my wife looked my way, but inside, I was somewhere else entirely. I wasn't thinking about the food. I wasn't thinking about the papers waiting in the living room. I was thinking about the timing, the preparation, the way all three of them had stepped into that moment together. I knew then that whatever happened next would depend on how I carried myself right now, calm, steady, predictable. So I stayed quiet, eating slowly, listening, observing the small glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. After dinner, my son-in-law collected the dishes. My son offered to help. My wife stayed behind with me for a moment, resting her hand on my arm. Thank you, she said softly, for being open. That means a lot to all of us. I gave her a small nod. I didn't tell her that nothing had been decided. And she didn't ask. She didn't need to. She thought she already knew. When the kitchen faucet turned on and their voices drifted just far enough, I quietly stepped away from the dining table and returned to the living room. The papers were still there, stacked neatly, corners-aligned pens placed beside them like an invitation. I sat down and picked them up again. This time I read the first few lines. Not deeply, not enough to get lost in the details. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. The transition they wanted wasn't temporary. It wasn't partial. It was complete. I would become a symbol, a figurehead, a quiet presence in a company I built with sweat sacrifice and years of steady work. My voice wouldn't matter. My decisions would be filtered. My role would be ceremonial. I placed the papers back down, slowly lining them up exactly as before. Then I leaned back and let out a long breath. Not angry, not defeated, just clear. When my son returned, wiping his hands on a towel, he gave me a gentle smile. We don't have to do this tonight, he said. Whenever you're ready. I looked up at him, holding his gaze. I appreciate that, I replied. My tone was calm, even warm. But I want you to know, I heard everything today. All of it. He nodded, not sensing the deeper meaning in my words. Good, he said softly. That's all we wanted. He walked back toward the hallway, leaving me alone again. And as I watched him disappear around the corner, I realized something simple but powerful. They believed they were ahead of me. They believed I was walking toward their conclusion. They didn't realize I was already several steps past it. Tonight wasn't about signing anything. Tonight was about learning the shape of their plan, so I could shape mine. And the moment the house fell silent again, I finally knew exactly what I needed to do next. When the house finally settled into silence, I stayed in the living room for a long moment. The papers were still on the table, untouched again. And this time, they didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything without even raising my voice. Morning light came softly the next day. My wife walked into the room with a quiet smile, unaware of what had unfolded behind the scenes. My son-in-law stayed distant. My son avoided eye contact. And for the first time in a long while, I felt no pressure sitting at that table, no weight on my shoulders, no fear about what came next, because the truth was already out. Their intentions were clear, and my decision was final. I spent the following weeks untangling every strand of my life they had tried to pull from my hands. I restructured the business. I tightened the accounts. I placed everything important into a trust that protected it from anyone's quiet ambition. And little by little, the house felt steady again. My son kept his distance, but he didn't push anymore. He understood the line that had been drawn. My wife stayed close, gentle, grateful for the calm that returned, and I watched her move around the kitchen with a peace I hadn't seen in months. One evening, as I stood in the yard watering the small row of plants I had kept for years, a soft breeze moved through the leaves. It felt like the first real breath I had taken in a long time. No tension, no quiet calculations, no listening for footsteps or whispers, just the steady rhythm of life coming back to itself. I didn't hold on to anger. It didn't serve me, and it didn't heal anything. But I also didn't forget the lesson hidden inside all of it, how quickly trust can shift, how easily good intentions can be twisted, and how important it is to stand firm even when the room feels heavy. Family isn't guaranteed. It isn't owed. It's chosen every day by the way we protect one another, not the way we pressure one another. And in the end, the truth held, not because I fought loudly, but because I refused to surrender quietly. If you've ever had someone close to you push past your boundaries, try to take what you built, or test the quiet strength you carry, you already know how important it is to stay rooted. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, please leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more real stories with real lessons. Now, take a breath, and hold on to what's yours.